Drive Australia.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. My name is Ross Cameron, my co-host Rowan Dean. You can find me on Twitter at RossCameron4. You can find Rowan Dean at Rowan Dean, editor of The Spectator, columnist in the Australian Financial Review, Australia's most anti-business newspaper. But we're absolutely delighted to have one of the last remaining voices of reason in the Australian Labor Party here with us now from our Canberra studio, the member for Melbourne Ports, Michael Danby. How are you, sir?
Thanks, Ross, and thanks for that big intro. I hope I live up to your expectations.
Well, I was going to ask you, as the opening, it must be a bit embarrassing representing a port when your political party is campaigning against bulk commodity exports. What's your view on coal?
It's not that embarrassing.
A tad embarrassing?
The trade in coal is not embarrassing. Obviously, it's part of the energy mix. And Melbourne has remained a great exporter of many commodities and importer too. Amanda and I go down on our bikes regularly to Elwood and count the number of ships going from that great port. So no shame in Melbourne being a port and exporting and importing.
Excellent. Now, Michael, you've written a great article in this week's Spectator magazine, basically looking at, well, you don't think Labor in Australia should be following the Corbyn path of UK Labor. We hear a lot about Corbyn and how Shorten is starting to echo parts of the strategy of Corbyn. Tell us why you are adamant that Labor in Australia must not go down the UK Labor-Corbyn path.
There's a very great film called The Rise and Rise of Michael Rimmer, and what it does is it shows you the perils of ultra-democracy. So there are many political parties, and Ross has got an interesting prospect with the Liberal Party, who believe that there should be rank-and-file participation in the elections of party leaderships and Senate members and these kind of things. All of them legitimate points of view. But the problem is that in Britain they've gone to this rise and rise of Michael Rimmer option, ultra-democracy, where any trot in Kensington has the same vote as the Foreign Secretary or the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And what that's meant is there are endless votes, endless deselections, endless elections for the National Executive. And of course, as the hard left who planned this envisaged, it means that all of the great unwashed who join the Labor Party in Britain eventually drop off, don't attend, and it's left to the hard left, to the old militant tendency that was expelled in the 1990s to seize control of the Labor Party. And I would argue that this is what Corbyn and his deadly internal organisation led by John Landsman, Momentum, planned in the British Labor Party. So I think the system we have here, introduced by Kevin Rudd, not for the reasons that were said to being introduced, i.e. democracy, but that there's 50% of the MPs elect the party leadership and 50% memberships. That's the right balance. Going as Mark Butler, our national president, indicated in the Corbyn direction is a very bad idea because of what's happening in Britain at the moment, which most people don't follow. But it's the British Labor Party is being taken further and further left.
But Michael, wouldn't we say, I mean, my retort would be that I think you are shooting the messenger, you are shooting the mechanism. That in truth we find across the West that the left, whether in Australia, in the UK with Corbyn, or indeed in the US with Bernie Sanders, and let's admit that Bernie Sanders would have won the nomination if the DNC, according to Donna Brazil, under Debbie Wasserman-Schultz, had not systematically rorted the Electoral College in favour of Hillary Clinton. We would have had Bernie Sanders. That this sort of anti-Semitic, divest, sanctions, hard leftist, big state, globalist movement is actually what is taking place in the West across the Western left. And I just think, I say you can blame democracy, but the truth is democracy is not dragging Labor to the left, it is revealing what the actual membership of the Australian Labor Party believe.
Well, the Australian Labor Party have about 50,000 members as against Britain under this new system of pay £3, you don't even have to be a member and you can vote for the leadership. I mean, they're very different political parties. And I said in my Spectator piece, which I believe just by coincidence Rowan happens to edit, that you can dislike Australian Labor for all legitimate reasons, Ross, and I don't expect you to become a convert. But Shorten talks mainstream issues, superannuation, all of the kinds of economic issues that some people find boring. But we're not bound up in extreme left ideological craziness as they are in Britain. In Britain, the National Executive of the Labor Party has intervened with a Labor council that wanted to build 6,500 homes for poor people in the suburb of, in the borough of Haringey, because it was a public-private partnership. The extreme left National Executive didn't want the private aspect of that to go ahead. Now that's disgraceful. 6,500 people deprived of homes for ideological reasons. And I say that we want to keep Australian Labor as it is. You may not like us, but we're at least talking about mainstream issues.
So, Michael, you talk in the article a lot about Momentum, and you mentioned them earlier. Just talk us through who Momentum are, how they managed to kind of take over the British Labor Party, bringing in what I think Ross is correct to say is this heavy Greens agenda, replete with anti-Semitism, replete with this kind of hardcore... You call them communists.
Well, Momentum are led by a guy called John Landsman, who was previously a member of the infamous militant tendency in the 1980s, which the great centre-left, I never thought I'd be singing his praises on national television, the great centre-left leader of the British Labor, Neil Kinnock, led the opposition of trade unions and ordinary party members and parliamentarians too. But Ross, what's happened is that MPs have no say in who is the leader of the British Labor Party. The trade unions, however much you disparage them, they're relatively sensible to many of the sort of broad-ranging membership-based organisations that we're talking about. I mean, trade unions in Britain are relatively sensible to some of the supporters of Bernie Sanders in the United States. So what's happened is you've now got, thanks to Ed Miliband, a system in Britain where only grassroots votes elect the party leadership. There are no place for MPs and trade unions as there used to be, a college of a third, a third, a third. It's not quite as good as our system here of having 50% membership and 50% MPs voting. You've got to have people who work with the leader. If you were working with a Kevin Rudd, if you were working with someone like that, the MPs have got to have the ability to have some say in whether we're making a convincing representation to the public. You've got a different problem in New South Wales where you've had consistently people avoiding rank and file pre-selections for members of the House of Representatives and the Senate, and I quite understand why the so-called right wing of the New South Wales Liberal Party is on a democratic jihad there. They're going in the right direction there, but what I'm talking about is national leaderships having mass memberships where only a small group of people participate and they eventually control the whole political party.
Now, Ross. Now, Michael, you do have some news for us that you want to tell us about pre-selections and so on. In Sydney, we've been very much aware of the Sydney Morning Herald with their kind of endless banging on about you. You've certainly been under pressure. Ross has mentioned on the show before how certain elements of Fairfax and the ABC are attacking Michael Danby. Tell us your news. Well,
I was very unpopular with some elements of the ABC because I published those those ads questioning their Middle East
McNeil.
correspondent, their Jerusalem correspondent. Their other Middle East correspondent, Matt Brown, is as straight as a die. I don't have any criticism of him, but they were very angry with me because of those ads. But look, pre-selections are always difficult. A number of people are thinking about their careers before this federal election. But under all of the arrangements in Victoria with the various factional lineups, I understand that sitting members are going to be re-endorsed, and I also understand that that's something that's going to be contemplated by the National Executive when it next, that's Labor's National Executive when it next meets. So Fairfax can run campaigns against me as much as it likes. The Labor Party is interested in winning Melbourne ports because we're interested in representing people who live locally and not being diverted by sort of hate Danby campaigns because he doesn't agree with Bob Carr's views on China or the Middle East.
Well, just drilling down to that question of those views. I mean, the Australian Labor Party gave us, one of its best government, effectively, under Hawke. And Hawke, of course, was a signal of rectitude in relation to the existence of the State of Israel. And yet we find over the decades since this sort of gradual white-anting, which has massively accelerated under Bob Carr, in Israel, this tiny little state of sort of 8 million people, you can barely find the angel on the pin of the needle, its geographic footprint in the Middle East. It is under assault from Hamas, from Hezbollah, from Iran, which still wants to push it into the ocean. Is Labor under the influence of this extreme green left agenda? Are you being targeted within Labor because you have sought to stand with a civilisation which goes back to before Moses in 1500 BC?
It's good to see someone who's got some historical perspective. Look, generally Israel has got is being targeted for a number of reasons. First of all, it's had the same government, Mr. Netanyahu, there for a long period of time, and inevitably international criticism takes place of any government that's been there for a while. But having said that, some of the unnatural obsession with this, state you describe as not being able to find on the top of a pin in a map of the Middle East, you're absolutely right, Ross. I mean, look what's happening in Syria. 500,000 people have been killed, mainly by their own government. Just last week, one group of the United Nations proved that Syria had restarted using chlorine gas on its own citizens in eastern Ghouta, which is a suburb of Damascus. Imagine 1/10 of the odium that Israel gets being attached to Syria. And talking about that, the rest of the region, Iraq, Iran, the war between Saudi Arabia and Yemen, it is unnatural that the Israel situation gets all of this perspective. I do think there's a bit of pushback in the Labor Party, and I have confidence that at our next national conference that there'll be a balanced resolution that's presented. But that's not without a lot of work, that's not without a lot of personal acrimony, and that's not without a lot of the trolls on Twitter and the hardliners surrounding Bob Carr and his gang, personally targeting you, taking dossiers around the parliamentary press gallery, all of these kind of things. I put up with it. I'm very proud of my background, and nothing is going to deter me from putting that point of view, however rough these people cut up. I'm, in for the long haul, and I've been doing it for nearly 20 years, and I'm happy to speak to you guys. I'm happy to speak to anyone about these issues. They're complicated. No society, whether it's Australia or Israel, is perfect, but you have to see, as you do, Ross, the overwhelmingly good, open, democratic society there with religious tolerance. I mean, it's the only place where the number of Christians are growing. Christianity, which began in the Middle East, is being driven out of Syria, out of the Palestinian territories, out of Iraq. It's the plight of Christians in the Middle East is terrible, and it's terribly ironic that the only place they're safe in is the Jewish state of Israel.
Absolutely. I just want to touch on one more thing about BDS in a second, but you're thrilled your news that, as far as you're concerned, the National Executive are going to endorse all sitting Labor members. That's your belief?
That's my belief, and there are factional arrangements which also do that in Victoria. There's a lot of turmoil there at the moment, but I understand that's the motivation of all of those people too. So it's not something especially for Danby, but if other sitting members are standing again, they will be re-endorsed as well. We don't want to be spending our time fighting each other in pre-selections. Bad news for Ross is that Shorten and crew, even people like me, are going to be turning our heat on Mr Turnbull before this next election.
Now, just quickly, I want to mention Roger Waters, BDS. Roger Waters was on The Project the other night, being sort of touched up by Waleed Ali, who was asking him why the creative boycott of Israel, ignoring the fact that the BDS movement does far more harm to Palestinians than it ever will do to the Israeli economy. Your thoughts on Roger Waters, Waleed Ali?
Rowan, my background is German Jewish, and we remember stormtroopers standing outside Jewish shops boycotting them. Roger Waters is one of the most infamous hardliners. He may dance there on The Project with Waleed Ali, but it doesn't sanitise his views. The BDS is made very clear by all of its leaders, including Omar Barghouti, is focused on elimination of the Jewish state. It's not aimed at changing its policies. And there's a terrible picture of Roger Waters with a black pig and a Star of David on one of his recent musical performances. I think that says everything
well, I'll tell Michael,
about him and his motivations.
Well, listen to this. I'm just going to play you a quick grab from that interview where they both, Ross, tend to agree that America is a great human rights abuser. Have a listen to Waleed Ali and Roger Waters.
Why the specific focus for you on the creative boycott of Israel? You're prepared to play all manner of countries that have terrible human rights records.
Yeah, like the United States, for instance.
Indeed.
So there you have it, Michael. Waleed Ali believes that America is the great human rights abuser. No mention of his home or his ancestral home of Egypt or any of these other, Syria and all the rest. America is supposedly...
See, the problem, Rowan, is all the millennials watching that Project program never have anyone who can debate these kind of things, debating Roger Waters or Waleed Ali. And frankly, most of the hosts wouldn't even see it as an issue. They wouldn't understand the issue.
Well, you know, one of my frustrations, if I may say, Michael, is how much we have already lost. When I wander around the, for example, eastern suburbs of Sydney, I find that outside every single Jewish institution, whether it is a preschool, a primary school, a synagogue, or whatever, there stands a security guard. And that bloke, nearly always male, his whole job is to hope and pray that nothing happens. That is his job. And I regard security guards standing outside cultural institutions in Australia in 2018 as a national disgrace.
Well, it's better than the situation in Europe where schools have been attacked and young children killed and where we don't have these security arrangements. And I have to say, in the praise of both political parties, Liberal and Labor, over the last 5 years, they've been very aware of these community concerns and have allocated a bit of capital for fortifying the schools and synagogues, etc. So these kind of things won't happen in Australia. Above all, let's remember, guys, that Australia is a great country, a tolerant country, and it's because it's concerned about these kind of things that it won't our security services, our police and our political institutions won't let those kind of terrorist events happen that have happened in Europe. I mean, it's alarming enough to come from Melbourne this morning and hear that some Bangladeshi student tourist has stabbed some poor Aussie bloke who's given her a homestay for one night, tried to stab him to death while he's been asleep in bed.
Yeah, unbelievable. And, you know, just finally, before we go, you've talked about Corbyn and the UK Labour's shift to the hard left. Corbyn himself has been mired in anti-Semitic scandals. Many people accuse people very close to him of being anti-Semites, very vocal anti-Semites within his cabinet or his shadow cabinet. Is there a danger Australian Labor will ever fall into that anti-Semitic kind of cesspit that UK Labor have allowed themselves to fall into?
I don't think so. Look, Greg Sheridan often identifies people in the Victorian right of the party as being the leaders of sort of foreign policy and opposed to those kind of trends. But I would say that that's a more general thing. I criticise Mark Butler in your paper, Rowan. I don't agree with Penny Wong on everything, but I would never suspect those people of wanting to go down the Corbyn path. I think there's something more reasonable in the air in Australia. I think people aren't as fanatical as they appear in the United Kingdom, but I do think it's a real danger for the UK. In a two-party system, the British Labor Party could be elected, and what has happened, and people don't realise it, is that the far left have virtually taken over a great political institution. Can you imagine Britain at the next election being led by Corbyn or some Corbynista? It's quite possible, and a lot of I was there at the last British election and at the University of Birmingham, and a lot of the young students were just interested in the fact that he promised free university education, a complete fake which he withdrew later, some days after the election. But you know, in a two-party system, in a great country like Britain, the Britain of Winston Churchill, darkest hour, all of those kind of things that we associate ourselves with, there is this real danger. And it does set up, I suppose you're right, Rowan, a danger all around the world that if the Corbynista path is proved successful, why not have Bernie Sanders in the United States? Why not have extremists here or in Germany? On the extreme left, so that what happens in Britain will be a message to social democratic parties all over the world.
Well, my final question, I mean, I rejoice about the fact that your pre-selection is secure, but what do you say to the argument of a small d Democrat such as myself that, you know, you say, oh, well, we don't want to be distracted by these internal fights. The incumbents will always say we don't want to be distracted. Isn't this a benefit for incumbents at the expense of your grassroots rank and file members who will be entirely excluded from choosing their candidates?
It probably is, but they should be given rights to vote for senators and upper house members. There should be plenty of venues for the expression of the power of rank and file people, Ross. So when there is a pre-selection in the House of Representatives for a new member, of course rank and file members should vote. But we had the opportunity to have rank and file voting in pre-selections for the Victorian Upper House. That was actually implied in the Victorian Labor Party's rules, and Mark Butler and the National Executive voted it down. So you can't, you know, call for it sometimes and vote it down others. You should be consistent. And I think there should be plenty of venues, both in the Liberal and Labor parties, for ordinary members to feel their muscles. At the same time, there is a role for the existing institutions, such as the federal Liberal Parliamentary Caucus or the federal Labor Parliamentary Caucus, in choosing their own leader. Can you imagine if, you know, some weird character, Pauline Hanson, when she was a member of the Liberal Party, joined hundreds of thousands of One Nation members to the Liberal Party and elected her as leader of the federal Liberal Party. Well, that would be unconscionable, and that's virtually what's happened in the UK. The people up here who know Malcolm Turnbull or Bill Shorten or Kevin Rudd should have some say in determining who their colleague is that's leading them on the Treasury benches.
Michael, I'd have used the example of Richard Di Natale ever getting into any position of power. But there you go. Michael, so glad, as you've told us today, your pre-selection is safe. Congratulations. You're a great voice. The Labor Party need more people like you, not fewer. Keep up the great work. And thanks so much for coming on Outsiders. And we'll take a short break here. And that was Michael Danby. And we'll see you later, Michael. Thanks.